What's going on, everybody? We're back with another episode of PH Nation. I'm your host, Colton Shackelford, owner of PH Nutrition, where we take nutrition and wellness a step further. It's all about giving you guys the information, the education to make justified choices for yourself. Anybody can sell you supplements. Anybody can tell you how to be a healthier person, but they're not actually going to give you the education, the value, and give you the right steps on how to get there. So that's what we're here to do today. That's what PH Nation is all about. That's what this podcast is all about. It's just to give you the education, give you a little bit more value, and help you understand why you're supposed to be doing the things that you're supposed to be doing to be a healthier individual. And today I'm joined with a good friend of mine, Dr. Alberto Florez. So, Dr. Florez, why don't you go ahead and give yourself a little intro, tell the people about yourself, and let them know what you do.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
So I am the owner of Pinnacle Performance and Wellness. I am a physical therapist. Our company is based off of maximizing human performance, whether that's rehabbing somebody back from an injury or doing any kind of cross-bridge, more of a performance type rehab, where athletes are still lacking after finishing their regular type of traditional PT that they do, all the way to performance training, where we work with athletes or active lifestyle individuals on making them better at their particular sport, or just better, healthier human beings. Okay. So we try to encompass all that in our practice, in our company. Yeah. We're just all about making people the best version of themselves.
Absolutely. I love that. And obviously that's something that we align on pretty well. So I guess give us a little bit of background on how you got into physical therapy, and then how that translated from just your standard, helping people in rehab, helping old people get back to, normal living after injuries, to what you actually do, more of the sports performance side of things.
Sure. So, I don't have the traditional, I tore my ACL and did rehab and kind of decided to go down that route. I was, been an athlete myself. I've always been into exercise and fitness. Was definitely more science geared. So thought I wanted to go to med school, be an orthopedic surgeon. So I started kind of down that route. Mm-hmm. Then I realized that maybe that wasn't, the length of time in school that was required, the debt that was required. Obviously, you got to take that into consideration. And just, when I really got down to it, I felt like I wanted to work with athletes. Thought it was maybe doing their surgeries, but then after kind of doing some observations, I recognized that I wanted to do the rehab part of athletes. So got applied, got into PT school here at Tech, and after I graduated, kind of didn't really. I knew I wanted to go orthopedic, sports med, but I don't think that I had the vision that or honestly, if I'm quite frankly, maybe the courage to step out on my own and do what I want to do. I felt like I needed to figure out what kind of therapist I needed to be. So I stepped into more of the traditional outpatient physical therapy, which usually is insurance based. Mm-hmm. The way that they are able to function, because reimbursements are so typically low for medical services, is it's volume based. Mm-hmm. So you see as many patients as you can. Sometimes it's 2 patients an hour. Sometimes it's 5 patients an hour. Yeah. So I did that for about 5 years, and it was just getting to the point where I just felt like there was a better level of care that could be provided. And I think that's kind of what started the itch, and trying to figure out how can I provide better care for people where they can work with me one-on-one and get the services that they truly need, so that they can get a tailored experience from injury back to being their normal self. So I finally took the plunge and decided to step out about 2 years ago, and I took my passion for fitness and wellness, and what my degree was in physical therapy, mm-hmm. and decided to start doing something that I feel like was much needed here. Yeah. Which is combining an element of strength and athleticism into our physical therapy treatments.
Man, honestly, I think that's extremely honorable, and I think it's really cool that you mentioned that you were in the traditional kind of outpatient therapy setting, and the thing that really triggered you to go do your own thing was the churn and the rate at which you are pushing clients in and out, because you're not actually spending enough time with them to be able to actually help them the way that you're supposed to. And that's what I kind of saw, whenever we got into, or whenever I got into the nutrition space with, former brand that we were, Powerhouse. It was just churn. It was just get them in, get them out as fast as possible. Don't spend any time with them, because the more time you spend with a customer, it's the less time that you could spend with the next customer making more money off of them. Mm-hmm. And that's the way that our business model was. And that's one thing that, we've tried to change as I've taken over and progressed. We brought in the wellness consultation spot so we can actually sit down and do in-body breakdowns and things like that. Because in a world like we currently live in, I mean, everybody is just go, go, go. It's so fast paced. There's churn everywhere you look. Everybody's about getting people in and getting people out. And it's not even really about the service that you can provide anymore. It's just about how fast can you make the money and then turn around and make it again. And so I feel like in a world like that, the service base, slowing things down, like, yeah, it may take a little bit longer to get things off the ground, or at least in our case it is, but it's going to have more of a long lasting impression on society and on the community because of the way that we're doing it. And because we're focusing on, providing the quality and providing the education and actually trying to change people's lives, rather than just like, hey, let's go to rehab and, let's rehab that injury. And then 3 months later, you didn't mess with the mental, so maybe your body is physically, adapted and it's healed, but most of an injury is psychological anyways. And so it's like, how was that? Was that taken care of? Did you spend enough time with them to actually, work on the mental side of things? And that's something where you obviously take it a step further. And it's like, okay, let's try to get you back, let's get you back to 100% on all aspects, and take however much time is needed to do that, rather than just trying to bring you in and bring you out for insurance purposes.
Sure. And I think that you hit on it with the mindset. With some patients, it can be just 50% of the battle, if not more.
Absolutely. Yep.
Because depending on the trauma involved with their injury,
mm-hmm.
And sometimes, what may be traumatic to me may not be traumatic to you.
Right. Absolutely.
But if you don't take the time to recognize that and rarely are people going to tell you I'm traumatized.
Yep.
Because sometimes they don't recognize it themselves, So seeing a patient, struggle with 6-inch box jumps,
mm-hmm.
To somebody from the outside, if you're working with 3 or 4 patients and you're just happen to look over there, like, you may think they're being a baby,
right? Yeah.
But you don't understand that, maybe their injury occurred while landing and they snapped an ankle,
yep.
or something like that. So just taking the time to listen. And I think, I've been blessed to where in my practice, I wouldn't say that, I'm the most skilled physical therapist. What I've been just able to do is actually take the time to listen.
Yep.
And when people start giving you clues, and
mm-hmm.
so maybe when they came in, they're complaining of their knee pain, but because you took that time to listen, now you trace it up, and it's really the cause of the hip.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Rather than just every time they come in, same thing. We're just going to work.
Let's work on that knee.
On that knee.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole time you're missing the mark.
Exactly.
And that's not to say that it's a bad therapist. It's just the system that was built, which is insurance based, and it just causes pretty much everybody. It's almost everywhere, in the medical community. It's just all about numbers.
Absolutely.
Get them in and get them out,
yep.
and obviously that's spilling over into the nutrition as well. So.
Yep.
I think the few of us that recognize this pattern and can figure out a way to do it alternatively and find the people. And I think it's also about working with the people
mm-hmm.
who care about themselves, who are willing to say, hey, I get that my insurance isn't going to cover this, but I'm tired of hurting.
Right.
And
like it may be a little more out of pocket, or I may have to actually, cut back on going to Starbucks or whatever
sure.
it is, but at least I'm taking care of myself physically on the wellness side of things.
Yeah. Yep. And it's unfortunate, but that's typically if you're trying to go and just get back to your 9-to-5 job and eat crappy and
mm-hmm.
be sedentary, then that generally tends to be not who walks through our door.
So before we get too far into what we were actually going to talk about, that's one thing that I actually kind of wanted to mention, because one study that I came across whenever I was going through my master's program was that, so whenever we experience an injury, right? Muscle tear, for instance. What is the process of hypertrophy? Process of hypertrophy is tearing muscles, so then we can calcify those muscles so they can regrow bigger and stronger. Mm-hmm. That's hypertrophy, right? Sure. Hypertrophy, whatever you call it. So if you have a muscle injury, its initial response is to calcify, to regrow, And then if you take into account proper training, proper rehab, it should, just based off of physiology alone, you should have an understanding that when a muscle regrows, it grows back stronger, right? So it's like if you have, especially a muscle-based injury, specifically like muscular-based injury, and you properly train, you properly rehab it, you should grow back stronger and better, right? But most athletes have a resistance to that because it's a psychological thing. And so that was one thing that I found like extremely fascinating, because I was like, well, duh, that makes sense. Like if you tear a muscle, it's going to grow back stronger as long as you do it the right way. Sure. But you're not going to, like, psychologically, you're going to think that it's weaker because you've already had an injury there. And so then you start holding back on certain exercises. Like, let's say you have a quad strain on a squat. Well, every time that you go do squats now, mentally you're holding back on that right quad because you already strained it. Well, now the left one's taking all the strain. And so then you're going to risk injuring the left one. And so it's just that study was really like fascinating to me. And then you had brought it up on the fact that, how much of that is actually mental. And so it was pretty baffling to like really sit there for a second and like think through that and be like, well, duh, like it's muscular hypertrophy. Like that makes perfect sense.
Yeah. And it can start there with, like I said, the mental aspect. The athlete or patient doesn't want to reproduce the same movement that caused their injury, which makes sense. Right. And that's where hopefully with the guidance of a professional, you show them, hey, you can do this, but maybe we start with, rather than going back to a back squat, we go to a goblet squat or something along those lines, right? Very simple example. But to speak further on what you're saying, they start compensating, right? So an initial quad strain that could have been a grade 1 or whatever, now you kind of are favoring the other leg. And after a while, your body adopts that new movement pattern, because our body's all about path of, as far as when it comes to energy conservation, it's all about path of least resistance, right? And so once it starts finding an easier way, whether it's correct or not, then it starts to, it's going to do that. Yep. And then by then it's past your knowledge of, like, being able to recognize it yourself. So you just keep doing that. And unfortunately then you start creating a bigger muscle imbalance, right? Where potentially as you do get back into the gym and maybe you do get over that fear, bam, there's a re-injury, and then that's when you see people, well, I'm just done working out. Well, it's because they never got over that initial psychological component, you know, and it cascaded and led down this.
My injury never got better. It never healed. Well, it did heal. It just then cascaded into something else because you psychologically didn't go through the recovery process. But without further ado, let's dive a little bit into, the concepts that we discussed talking about today. So I think we have some really fun things to go over, especially on a consumer standpoint, people getting into sports performance, people that are already pretty advanced in sports performance, people that want to stay, quote unquote, natural. We've got some really good stuff for them, right? Creatine supplementation. First,
the steroid of the king of steroids,
the king of all steroids, right? So, first off, what's your thoughts on creatine supplementation? Just currently as is, with your knowledge and all that stuff. Where do you sit with creatine supplementation? Age ranges for dosing, that kind of stuff. Who can utilize creatine in your mind? Let's go down that route first.
I love it.
Yep.
I mean, I think literally cannot. The only population I maybe don't recommend it to is like young athletes. So I would usually high school or like less than high school, junior high and under. Is where I don't really recommend creatine just yet. But from the high school level all the way up to my 85-year-old total knee replacement, I recommend creatine. Maybe not during our evaluation, but one of our first 2 treatments, because to me it makes, there's not, I don't know what other supplement has been like more widely studied.
I mean, as far as I know, there's not one. It has the most clinical data to support its efficacious and its ability. I mean, out of any supplement, any product available.
And we, you think of creatine for. Okay, number one thing you think of when you think of creatine is your typical male high school student who wants to get bigger. Right? Because that's where, that kind of, that shifts and sometimes happen. And it's typically boys, as they start getting more and more into the gym, they start getting more muscular. and so they want to look at what can help that.
Right.
But and we spoke about sports performance. Absolutely, it can help in sports performance. But like I said, I just spoke about my 85-year-old patient. And we'll get more into maybe some of the neurocognitive defensive things that they're recently finding with creatine. But for me, creatine is going to help improve sports performance in that high school athlete. But guess what? It's also going to help build the stronger muscles for that 85-year-old patient who doesn't need to fall and break a hip.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yep,
and
absolutely.
so from all age ranges, again, except maybe really young, I recommend it. Dosage wise, it seems to me, like that there used to be this big thing that it needed a loading phase. I think now that's kind of been a little bit further studied. It doesn't seem like you need a loading phase.
Right.
I usually recommend, anywhere 5 to 10 grams. Obviously, if you're if you're a little bit heavier, 185 and above, somewhere, to 220, maybe 225 or somewhere around there, I think is what I read. You can go up to 15 grams and maybe a little more after that, if you're heavier than that. But most people tend to fall within that weight range.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
And then if you're lighter than that, then stick to 5 grams. I do say that, and again, feel free to, correct me if I'm wrong, but it needs to be consistently taken every day.
Yeah, I mean, that's, especially from what I've always understood, originally it was my doctor telling me that, if you take creatine, you're going to die. Your kidneys are going to explode. Yeah. Wow. Okay. I can't take creatine. Like I can take steroids, but I can't take creatine. I know. Good deal. So, that's one thing that's always drove me nuts about creatine and the medical industry is like, first off, medical professionals half the time don't know anything whenever it comes to supplementation or nutrition. And then they act like they do. And because they have a doctorate or an MD behind their name, people take it as truth. They take it as fact. And it's like, if you don't know what you're talking about, just don't talk about it. Like, it's okay to not know as a doctor. Like, just say, hey, you know what? I don't have a whole lot of study or base, knowledge in creatine, so I'm just not going to recommend that. There's people out there that do.
Right.
And so that's one thing that's always drove me nuts because I was always, super fearful of creatine. And then it was, okay, now I understand creatine is great at a dosage of 5 grams a day, but you don't want anything more than 5 grams or you're going to explode your kidneys.
Yeah.
And so now, over the past few months here recently, I've seen a lot of new studies come out. And that's the other thing that blows my mind is like, there is still more research being done on creatine to this day. And it is the most studied and tested sports performance product on the market. There's no question about that. But there are still new things coming out that we know that are changing our perspective to what creatine can actually do for the body. So recently they're finding, going back, you had mentioned the cognitive benefits of creatine are now starting to be the main focus. It's not even a performance on a physical aspect. It's a mental side of things. And the cognitive benefits of creatine are profound at this point. Like, we are seeing very, very noticeable data amongst all sorts of forms of literature. I mean, everything from meta-analyses of previous data to new data that's coming out through new studies, where 12 to 15 grams a day is shown to increase blood plasma levels by a very high percentage and give your brain the ability to actually regrow neural connections. Just like with the body. I mean, creatine helps grow muscle, helps grow connective tissue, and connective tissue is your brain, right?
Sure.
And so now we're seeing in the data that it is actually helping regrow neural connections that were once lost at some point. It's creating new brain activity. It's exciting different parts of the regions of the brain. And it's just very fascinating to me. And so I've personally increased my dose. I was doing just 5 grams a day maximum, but I have personally increased my dose now to 12 grams a day.
And your kidneys are fine.
Yeah, my kidneys are great.
Oh,
so as far as I know, I mean, they haven't exploded yet, at least. And so at 12 grams, I do 5 fasted first thing in the morning, and then I do another 5 pre-training, and then I do 2 a night before bed.
So you space yours out.
I space them out a little bit.
That's good to know.
My morning, there's times where like I'll be like, I'm going to forget today, pre-training. And so I'll do 10 grams. And I have noticed that mental acuity, my ability to form short-term memory and just to focus a little bit better is higher, like noticeably higher whenever I take a full 10 gram, more bolus type dose first thing in the morning on an empty stomach. And I came across a study that actually, oddly enough, kind of points to that. And it shows that single high dose creatine does show a direct performance enhancement through literature, through the data, and showing 12 to 15 grams a day is needed to increase neuroprotective properties and more. And a study from nature.com shows that a single high dose creatine, which they dosed at 0.35 grams per kilogram of body weight, led to a direct positive effect on cognitive function and restoration to sleep deprived functions. So they deprived patients of sleep for 48 hours. They gave them all the same kind of setting. Obviously, it was a controlled experiment. So they deprived them of sleep for 48 hours. The placebo group obviously showed continuously neurological decline after the 48 hours. The non-placebo group that was taking the high dose, single bolus dose of creatine showed a extreme reverse of the sleep deprivation side effects that they were experiencing, and an increase in ability to form short-term memory and focus, which was, awesome. I mean, mind-blowing stuff.
Well, I wonder if that, the neuroprotective properties also, because I think, I want to say I don't know if this was in a podcast or if I read it, but it talked about there's also links to helping prevent dementia with creatine.
Yep. I've seen that too. Yeah,
and that makes sense. Like if it's protecting, the degradation of your neurons in your brain, which is what happens when you
get old.
You get older. Then that would make sense that it helps fight off some dementia. So I mean, it's not even. We're not just talking about sports performance and muscle building now. We're talking about keeping our brain for longer periods of time.
Yeah, so. just overall performance and wellness in general. Like creatine there is no question about it. Like apart from potential slight gastrointestinal discomfort if you're taking extremely high doses, or slightly raised creatine levels if you're again taking high doses for your body weight. There are zero reported side effects in all of the data. Yeah. Like there are a few, like, yes, you can go onto Google and you can find plenty of articles that were funded by a company that doesn't like creatine for some reason. Yeah. And it talks about all the negative cascading effects of creatine in the body. But there is not a single non-biased peer-reviewed journal that says that creatine has a detrimental side effect of any kind.
And it's compromised of amino acids.
That's it.
What it's formed,
right?
Which we have tons of in our body.
Yep.
It's found in red meat and fish. So I mean, obviously, probably at a smaller level. You have to consume high doses of the foods to get.
Well, and that's the one argument that people have against creatine supplementation is, you can just outsource it through your diet. We didn't need creatine supplemented through our diet in years past. Right. This is just a recent thing. Yeah. Well, I mean, have you looked at the nutrient quality of our food in recent years past versus historically? Absolutely. It's like I'm sure the creatine levels in red meat and fish nowadays aren't even close to what they used to be. Yeah. So we used to be able to outsource everything through our diet, but we can no longer do that in today's society. We have to supplement certain things. And I think creatine is one of those supplements that needs to be a staple in, I would say, probably 95% of people's regimens.
I agree.
Heck yeah.
100%.
Yeah. And then the neural thing, like just the potential that it has for neurological effects is where I really think that it's extremely exciting. And the fact that there's still new data coming out on creatine, even though it's been so studied for years and years and years now. Yeah. So it's fascinating to me, like how science can progress and continue to progress.
I would be blown away if you go to your doctor and he tells you, hey, start taking some creatine, so right. I just don't see that happening.
Never. Yeah.
And part of that's, unfortunately, and I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but it's just like, why would we incentivize people to do something that is preventative, that's affordable?
Yep.
When we could make billions of dollars
more money on something else,
prescribing medicines, and again, we're talking about big pharma now, which I'm not going to
that's a whole other podcast on its own, right?
But I mean, it's just like exercise, and what we preach to our patients and our clients is like the number one preventative medicine is exercise. There's no other medication out there that affects your musculoskeletal system, endocrine levels, your sexual function, hormone levels, all that stuff in a positive way.
Right.
If exercise was in a pill, people would be lining up around
all day
the block
long
for it.
All day long.
So, but it's hard,
Yeah.
And so
Yep.
There's your answer right there.
And that makes so much sense, especially whenever you're looking back at the medical field. So again, it just comes down to, if you are relying on medical professionals for your health and well-being, that's okay. That's great. I mean, that's what you're supposed to be doing, right? Just make sure that you're also vetting those sources and, getting a second opinion on those things as well. Sure. And maybe an opinion from somebody that is a little less biased whenever it comes to sports performance products, because whenever a doctor, specifically like a medical professional doctor, hears, especially like a family practice doctor, let's go like that route, they hear sports performance. Well, obviously they're probably going to start thinking of all the negative things. I mean, it's like, and that's another like thing that's slightly irritating is like sports performance and performance enhancement doesn't have to be negative thing. It doesn't have to be steroids. It doesn't have to be something that, negatively affects the body long term.
Exercise is performance
it's a performance enhancing. Yeah. So it's like the term performance enhancement isn't a taboo negative thing, even though it has that negative connotation attached to it. Sure. So that's another thing to get like across your head is like performance enhancement is just enhancing your performance. It's getting better at what you're doing.
Sure. Yeah.
And whatever.
And that doesn't have to be a sport.
Exactly.
You might just want to be a better cycle bar person.
Yeah.
They have a leaderboard and you want to climb that leaderboard.
Yep.
That's okay.
You might want to be a better father, husband, or businessman.
Absolutely. And
you want better brain function. And so you start taking 10 grams of creatine a day on an empty stomach and you realize how much that actually helps your brain function.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many benefits to it. You don't have to be just an athlete. And that's one thing that people need to understand whenever it comes to creatine supplementation is it's not negative. Mm-hmm. There is plenty of research to support the fact that it is beneficial, very beneficial with no negative side effects. Let's be real about it.
And I can tell you this. So WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency.
Right.
They are pretty strict on, I have a sports performance coach who's just competed at the Olympic trials. I mean, their testing regimen is pretty
intense.
Strict.
Yeah.
And creatine is not on their banned list. So, I mean, if that tells you something like Olympians are allowed to take it.
Exactly.
So, I mean, if they're okaying it, that's because they believe it's not that dangerous. And I guess, I don't know if they, maybe they think it's not elevating performance to a certain point where it becomes, not subhuman, but above normal human levels.
Exactly.
Or whatever.
So, super physiological levels.
Yes.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. 100%. 100%. On that line of sports performance, natural sports performance enhancing products, one thing that is often met with skepticism, or at least in our world, whenever it comes to supplementation and product utilization and efficacy, is beta-alanine. And I personally am a huge fan of beta-alanine. I think beta-alanine supplementation has a lot of benefits. There's a lot of uses for it, and I also believe that it is pretty efficacious. I mean, I know personally from an anecdotal experience, whenever I take higher doses of beta-alanine, like let's say 4+ grams per serving, there are immediately noticeable endurance benefits that I get. Like cardio isn't as hard. Doing a mile run doesn't feel like a mile run without it. So, from an anecdotal experience, I think there's absolutely benefit to beta-alanine supplementation. But what's your perspective on it?
No, I agree. I've tried it myself. I do a little bit of like HIIT training, or sometimes I'll do some CrossFit style workouts, and I definitely can tell a difference that I can just kind of keep pushing a little bit harder, and I'm not. It takes me a little bit more to get to that red line,
Yep.
And that's something that I kind of stumbled upon. I don't remember what it was. I was listening to a podcast and it had Matt Frazier on there, and he kind of went in on talking about how beta-alanine is a big supplement that he uses in order to help them, give them that extra engine. And that's where I got kind of curious. I was like, well, I'm going to try it. And it does work,
Absolutely.
There's obviously a little bit of that, irritating itch that you can get.
Yep.
But I think if you dose it properly, you can minimize that to a point where you've kind of hit a steady state and you don't really get that uncomfortable itching,
Absolutely. I definitely think so. And I personally love the itch. I mean, it's one of those things that fires me up to actually start working out. But I guess in an endurance type aspect, I guess you could say I wouldn't necessarily want that as much.
Sure.
In a weight training aspect. I love it because
Yeah.
it's like it fires me up to actually do something.
Right.
But if I'm just standing there waiting to run a mile or something, I don't know that I want to be super itchy. So I definitely see it from that perspective. Diving into like the science behind beta alanine a little bit more, I started to notice that the purpose of beta alanine supplementation is to convert to carnosine. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And carnosine is an amino acid that assists with all sorts of metabolic function within the muscle. But the conversion process of carnosine, beta alanine to carnosine through carnosine synthase is a ATP dependent conversion. So it has to have high amounts of ATP to have that conversion to carnosine. So if dosing, in my opinion, theoretically, if dosing beta alanine with creatine, you're going to have the assisted ATP production. You're going to have the assistance in the actual conversion of beta alanine to carnosine. And creatine is also endurance performing. So if you take beta alanine and creatine simultaneously, you should expect even more profound endurance capabilities, more profound performance enhancement, because you're actually acting within the cascading metabolic cycle of beta alanine to carnosine, adding ATP in there from the creatine.
Yeah, that makes sense. I didn't
really either.
Go kind of hand in hand together.
And I have noticed that so there's some products that we carry specifically that have creatine and beta alanine together in the same product, and I have noticed that those products they work a little bit better. Like whenever I take creatine by itself, cool. Whenever I take creatine or beta alanine by itself, great. But whenever I take those products together, I notice that at least anecdotally, I get a better experience on the performance side of things.
That I forgot to ask this. So I know that because creatine has been proven to work, and I'm going back a little bit on creatine, but so I think companies, nutrition companies have kind of jumped on that train, and in order to outmarket themselves, they're like, well, we've just invented this super creatine or whatever, whatever it may be.
Yep.
What is your thought on that? Like, what is, because I've, again, this is from what I've kind of researched and studied on, all you really need is monohydrate.
Yep.
Is there a better?
So in my opinion, there's only two forms of creatine that I pay attention to. There's creatine mono and there's creatine hydrochloride. I do think the creatine HCl, creatine hydrochloride, has enough data to support its efficacy and the less water retentive effects that it has.
Okay.
So I do think that hydrochloride is a usable form and it is slightly less water retentive. Now, probably 95% or more of the data that we have on creatine is on monohydrate. So if we're going to source any source of creatine, we're going to utilize any, I would predominantly stick to monohydrate unless I know for sure I'm trying to retain less water. And at that point, then yes, maybe taking a hydrochloride form is going to be a little bit more beneficial for you. But one thing on dosing hydrochloride is you still need to dose the creatine. Like people think that creatine hydrochloride is, more fortified or micronized or all these other little terms that don't really mean anything. Right. You still need a good 4 to 5 grams at minimum to get the efficiency that you're going to experience from that creatine. Okay. So a lot of like hydrochloride forms are dosed at, 1.2 to 1.5 grams. That's not a usable dose. Yeah. So it's one of those where I do think hydrochloride is a usable form. But apart from that, mono is the only one that I would suggest. Nine times out of 10, I'm monohydrate all day long.
Okay.
Yep.
Good to know.
Yep. And there are, I think I came across, I think there's 21 forms of creatine that we currently have available. So yeah.
And that's not to say that they don't work. I just think that obviously there's not very much research on them.
And it definitely comes down into, I think, a lot of it also comes into the consumer psychology aspect whenever it comes to creating and marketing products. The creatine gummies, like to each their own, right? It's all about the form of administration more than anything, the route of administration. But like creatine gummies are going to set the barrier to entry to actually having a good amount of creatine saturated into the muscles way up here, because you have to eat so many of them to actually hit that threshold. Sure, yeah. And then it's like, how do you even know that there's that much creatine in those gummies? Like whenever it comes down to supplementation in the supplement industry, there's no regulation from the FDA making sure that they're putting this on here. Like, yeah, they have to face label claims in the future. And if they get a lawsuit, then they're screwed. But it's like, who's telling you that there's 5 grams of creatine in these gummies that you're eating?
Yeah.
So it all just comes down to the easy manipulation of the consumer and how companies go about that and labeling it as super creatine or whatever the heck it is. And it's, at the end of the day, it's just creatine, and take creatine the best way for you as an individual, and take creatine dosed for you as an individual. And that's all there is to it. Like,
Do you do powder or pills?
I do powder. Yeah.
what I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In capsule form, I just have to take way too many of them.
Yeah.
And powder is the way I go all day.
For
Yeah.
me, at least.
Yeah, that's. Honestly, when I started it, it was a game changer for me. My morning regimen has been so great for probably about 3 weeks now. It is the element packets, 1 element packet. So sodium, magnesium, potassium. 5, I just bumped it up to the 10 grams of creatine first thing in the morning, and then some glutamine, and that's my morning cocktail. 28 ounces of water, all that in there, and I sip on that on an empty stomach. And
What's the glutamine do for you?
So glutamine is going to be great for all sorts of things. Glutamine is kind of the holy grail of amino acids whenever it comes to recovery. Just helping the body regrow or refacilitate certain aspects, and is good for helping the digestive lining. So smooth muscle, it helps with muscle recovery. It helps reducing lactic acid. It's going to help with just long-term muscle recovery. So if you have a lot of soreness post-workout, that kind of stuff, it's going to help reduce soreness, or at least reduce your time to getting back into the gym. Glutamine is a very, very useful product, especially if you are pretty heavily in sports, pretty heavily involved in weight training or sports performance of some aspect. You need to increase your recovery along those lines. Glutamine is definitely going to be a key player in that. I always joke around and say, you know what I glutamine? So yeah, glutamine and creatine, those are my 2 like staples. Got to have them for sure. And then on an empty stomach, I get the most benefit from them, I feel. So best absorption and just the best reaction to each. So that's the way I always take mine. That's my start in the morning. That's how I start my morning. So, we kind of touched on it there for a second, but WADA and what they deem, acceptable in form of natural performance enhancements. So one thing that is recently, probably over the past like 3 years or so, gained a lot of focus and attraction in the industry are ectosteroids, or natural anabolics. And I believe they're actually still being looked at by WADA to be determined if they need to be banned or not. Whenever I was doing some research, I still saw that it's kind of still up there in the air as far as if they're going to be banned or not. But what's mind blowing is there are multiple studies, like actual clinical studies, that show that ectosteroids, particularly ectosterone and testosterone, are just as anabolic, if not more anabolic, than actual anabolic steroids like Dianabol, which is, super fascinating to me. Yeah.
It's crazy.
And on a personal experience, I have utilized testosterone quite a bit, actually, up to pretty high doses, and even at smaller doses, I've utilized it all over the place. I would say that there is a very noticeable effect that you get from something like testosterone whenever it comes to strength performance, muscle development, and all of that. It is very, very prevalent in my opinion. And I think that there's a lot that goes into the cascading pathways that ectosteroids or natural anabolics utilize, because they don't cause the same markers to come up that normal anabolics do, yet they have a very similar, if not more profound effect on the musculoskeletal system. So
interesting.
Yeah. Do you have
I've heard of testosterone, but I think it was, as you probably know, Derek, from
More Plates, More Dates.
I think that's the first time I kind of got exposed to it. And, but didn't dive too deep into it at the time. Did a little bit of research recently, and it seems promising. It definitely. And doesn't it, aren't they derived from
plants?
Yeah,
plant sterols. Yep. And so they're plant sterols. They're basically what helps formulate the exoskeletons for plants and bugs and things like that.
That's what it was. I know it's there's something with bugs too. So that's something I haven't experimented with, but I kind of want to look into it now and just kind of see. Well,
that's what really got my gears turning, was I found that study comparing it on a head-to-head basis to Dianabol, and I was like, whoa, if it can actually have clinical performance to something that is, touted as the best oral anabolic agent to grow muscle. Everybody takes D-bol to grow muscle if you're taking anabolics, right? So it's if it can actually stand on its own against something like Dianabol, well, then it obviously is something that I need to be paying attention to. And when I started taking it, I noticed profound effects. Strength went up. I did start taking it in a, quote unquote natural state. So I was off all anabolics for a while. I think I was even off TRT at that point. So I was non-existent with hormone production. And I started utilizing it, but I had very profound effects. I mean, my muscle development changed drastically in just probably 2 to 3 weeks. Like, I mean, I was bigger, I was fuller, I was stronger, and it was noticeable, very noticeable. And so I was definitely a huge fan of that. And then to see it backed up in the literature was awesome.
Is that something that you guys offer?
We do have a few testosterone products. Yeah. And that's where like, so it's weird because like ectosterone is what has more, I think, like actual data on it. But testosterone is what is more used in the sports performance world.
Gotcha.
But what I came across shows that ectosterone specifically has a higher affinity for muscle development than what testosterone does. But when you combine the two, awesome progress. I mean, you have, really, really great potentials there. So the natural plant sterols, the natural anabolics, I think is a really cool market that again, when science progresses, we learn new things and we have new developments. And I think that's one that'll probably grow quite a bit. It's just interesting to see how the performance world is going to take those products. How is WADA actually going to classify those? Because there is no hormonal downstream metabolite like there is whenever you take an anabolic. It's like you can test for anabolics and all sorts of metabolites downstream for months and months and months. But like these are natural plant sterols, so it's like I don't know what kind of cascading function those are going to have, and it's going to be interesting to see how doping agencies treat those, like WADA and stuff like that.
Did you do any kind of blood work when you were?
So I did it prior to running their testosterone, but I didn't after. So that would be something that I would be interested in seeing too. What its effects are directly on like testosterone production and that kind of stuff. Because if it's not through a hormonal pathway, if it's not increasing some sort of hormone production or altering some sort of hormone uptake, then what method is it utilizing to increase, anabolic potential and all of that? That's something that's definitely on my mind. Is like, what is the pathway that it's utilizing to increase muscle development? And so
that's interesting.
Yeah, super cool stuff. But it all like, I mean, it's funny too because it's like every generation there's something new. Every generation there's this new holy grail for natural muscle developments or whatever it is. Is like probably 10 years ago and 10 to 6 years ago, probably, laxogenin was huge. I don't know if you ever really got into Laxo or not, but again, it was another like plant steroid that blew up, and it has efficacy, but not nearly as much as what like testosterone does. So it's just interesting to see like where the sports performance and the natural side of things always goes. They always try to take it, a step further, and then always try to find the new things. But specifically with like these guys, the testosterone and the plant sterols, there's a lot of, I think, potentials there, in my opinion.
It sounds like it could be pretty easily compounded as well.
Yeah,
I mean, if it's coming from,
it's natural. Yes, I mean, it's from what I understand, it's pretty easy to get and it's pretty easy to keep and store,
which should also make it affordable.
Yeah, no, it's well,
maybe.
I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, especially because it's a performance market, people are always going to be charging more than what it's probably worth. But I wouldn't say it's like expensive. I mean, you're definitely paying for the product, but you usually, as long as you utilize it the right way, you're going to get what you pay for. All right, man. And to segue into, one of our last topics here, I think we're kind of on that. So let's finish trends and just the growing popularity amongst the younger generations in general. So like, I love it because, more people are getting involved and more people are understanding that like, hey, I need to take my health and wellness seriously. But at the same time, coming off of like the natural anabolic side of things, I keep seeing it everywhere. And it's something where I was like, at first I was like, nah, like this is just clickbait. But it really, there really is a anabolic steroid epidemic amongst the youth population right now. And it's sad to see on that aspect. I mean, that's where fitness being trendy has become toxic, because there's zero education, or what education is available out there is wrong most of the time. Most of these kids are getting their education from something like TikTok, which, and then they have they don't have a knowledge of how to go research that education. So they can't go back it up with clinical data. They see somebody say something on TikTok and they're like, oh yeah, I'm going to take that as, truth. And then they go out and they put exogenous hormones in their body, whether it's SARMs or it's pro-hormones or it's actual anabolic steroids, whatever it is. And like, I mean, it's hard for me to say certain things, but it's also my job because, this is what I do. And I got put on SARMs at 14. Like I walked into my local supplement shop and I was like, yo, what's going to get me big? And they're like, bro, you need this. And they put me on YK11, which YK11 is a designer anabolic steroid. Like, let's call it what it is. It's sold as a SARM, but YK11 has a hormonal component to it. It's part of the 19-nor family, so it's in the same as like nandrolone, trenbolone. It's basically a cousin of tren. And people sell it as SARMs, and they back in the day they used to sell it as, you know, hormone free. It wouldn't alter your hormone production at all. That's at least what we sold it as whenever I was buying them as a 14-year-old freshman. And now we at least know that, hey, these do have cascading functions where they do affect your hormone production, and you do need to pay attention to this. But it seems like kids just don't care. Like, the amount of people that I have come into the shop, and they may be joking, but at the same time, they're not joking. And they're like, do you sell tren? And I'm like, just the fact that you joke about that shows me, like, A, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, you don't know how serious this stuff is. And then B, it makes me really, really fear for what's coming in the future.
Yeah. I mean, it's and I think a lot of it is, like you mentioned, social media, you know,
absolutely,
just the pressure to look a certain way.
Absolutely.
And it sets an unrealistic standard of what kind of a normal physique should look like.
100%.
You know? And I'm not by any means saying that, like, if you want to get on gear, and but I am a proponent of, like, do it safely.
Absolutely.
You know, make sure somebody's monitoring your blood work, you know,
100%.
and also, but starting at the high school level, I mean, you've hardly, you know, you haven't developed yet enough. Like, you're really putting yourself for long-term health issues.
Yeah.
You know, if you're not careful and starting that young.
Right.
So,
yeah. No, there was one, I'll send it to you now. I was going to try to pull it up there in the podcast, but and watch it a little bit. But there's a YouTuber. His name is Will Tennyson is what his name is, I believe. Really popular YouTuber. And he went around a Lifetime or LA Fitness, one of the two. And he asked all these, like, it was like 100 guys if they were on gear. Yeah. And it was like the amount of guys that said they were on gear that didn't even look like it. It was like, what are you taking this for? And it's like, don't get me wrong, like, I've been young and dumb.
Sure.
But at some point you need to be realistic with yourself. Like, first off, what are you taking the gear for? Do you actually have a chance of being a professional in whatever it is that you're trying to achieve? Because if not, then you shouldn't be taking the gear in the first place. And then second off, like, do you really understand how these are affecting your long-term hormone function? Like, once you put exogenous hormones in your body, your chemistry, your internal chemistry is forever changed. Yep. Forever. Like, yes, you may get natural production back or whatever, but your internal chemistry is forever different because you put an external chemical in your body, an external exogenous hormone in your body. And people don't put enough weight on that. They don't think about it enough.
They also don't realize that, you know, those guys that are pro bodybuilders, like, A, they have incredible genetics, and B, the amount of work that they're putting in
100%.
In the gym, it's insane.
Yep.
And also the dedication to their diet and all that stuff.
Absolutely.
So it's not like you're just going to pop something in or inject something in and boom, you're just swollen and shredded. There's a lot of other factors that go into it.
Yeah, and steroids at the end of the day are supplements. Like, they are meant to supplement whatever you are doing. Like, supplements are meant to supplement your daily lifestyle habits. They're not meant to fill holes. They're not meant to fill voids. They're not meant to make up for something that you're lacking. They are meant to supplement. And that's where people, I don't think far enough into it. Like, okay, am I doing enough to where supplementing an anabolic steroid or supplementing, you know, something like even protein, like, am I doing enough in my day-to-day life where supplementing a protein powder is going to actually benefit me? Yes or no? Because if not, then I'm wasting my money, and then I'm going to end up getting mad at the person that sold me the protein or the product or whatever it is, because I didn't get the result I was expecting. So I think that's a huge aspect of, you know, fitness being trendy. That's great. Like, let's get more people involved in fitness. Let's get younger people involved in fitness and get them started earlier, because that's something where I wish I would have had more guidance in fitness. Like, I got started young, but I didn't know what I was doing. And there's still a lot of that. You know, it's like there's still way too much improper education, you know, wrong education. And there's still way too many kids not doing what they should be doing and getting into it for the wrong reasons, or doing the wrong things whenever they do get into it. And those will eventually perpetuate over and over and over again as generations go. And we're going to continue to have more young people get involved in this stuff at way too early of an age.
How many, like, of these, like, you know, famous social media bodybuilder influencers have died this past year? Right. At, like, a young age, in their 20s, some of them, you know? And that's, who knows when they started. That's I think it's really tied into that.
Absolutely.
It's like I said, it's got to be like, I'm not going to tell you what to do and not to do. It's your life, but at least try and find some resources to do it safely.
Yep. That was one thing that I didn't deal with prior to getting into pursuing bodybuilding or utilizing anabolics, was the effects that it was going to have on me long term, and the way that I was going to view my life afterwards.
Sure.
And then whenever my wife and I got engaged, I was a mess. I mean, I was having crazy amounts of anxiety and all sorts of things, because I started to think about how those anabolics and those choices I were making were taking years off of my life that I was going to spend with my future family and my children. Yeah. And then it's like, you don't think about that at 19, you don't think about that even at 20, 21, 22. It's like, until you're in that boat, you don't think about that. So it's hard for you to even put yourself into that kind of a mindset. But if you are thinking about getting into fitness, if you are thinking about dabbling with performance enhancers, and more extreme performance enhancements that are going to alter hormone function, think about long term. That's the only thing that I can say, is think about long term and then try to do it the right way. Sure. And if you are wanting to get into fitness, reach out to somebody too. I mean, there's plenty of people out there that have already done all this stuff, that have already made all these mistakes. Like, I'm the first one to say, like, I have made plenty of mistakes whenever it comes to my health, my fitness, and my longevity. Right. So reach out and ask some questions, like, try to learn before you make those mistakes. I think that's one huge aspect of it too. Like, quit just watching from afar, quit just viewing from the stands, like, actually try to reach out to those people, ask them questions. And if they don't answer your questions, ask somebody else. Yep. Somebody will eventually answer what question you have, and then ask again and make sure it's the right answer. Yep. It's all about the validation and taking care of yourself and taking it a step further whenever it comes to your fitness and longevity. So
absolutely.
Heck yeah. Well, brother, I had a lot of fun going through all of this information today. It's something where I definitely want to sit down and not have to deal with cameras shutting off and all this crap in the future. It's something where I think we can really get some great combos. So I look forward to the next one with you, man.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
You guys, if you need any questions about nutrition or supplementation, make sure you hit up PH Nutrition. It's the spot to be at in town.
Man, likewise, brother. I mean, if you ever need anything recovery service-wise, PT, rehab, y'all are the place to go, especially on a sports performance side of things. So before we wrap it up, is there anything you'd like to throw out to the people one more time?
No, I mean, I think we covered everything.
Alrighty.
So
perfect. Sounds good. Yeah. Well, I appreciate all you guys listening, and I appreciate you again. And that's going to be a wrap for this one.